Matthew chapter 6. Moving right along. Sermon on the Mount. Still going. I told you guys it was going to take like all year to get through this, so I thought I was joking. We are in Matthew chapter 6, starting at verse 19, talking about treasures in heaven. Again, Jesus talking, and he says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is a lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light, but if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Okay. Talking about money again. We just talked about money a couple weeks ago and giving. We're just going to keep talking about it because it's important. Treasures in heaven. And sometimes I think we read this passage and it doesn't always seem like it goes together in a lot of ways. Like it's talking about treasures, then it starts talking about your eyes, and then it's back to treasures again. But actually, it all falls in line perfectly, as we'll see tonight. Jesus is not sporadic or spastic or anything like that. It all lines up perfectly. And essentially what we're talking about tonight is three sets of choices. Three sets of choices that we each are going to choose. And that we're not just going to choose once, but we choose probably daily in a lot of ways. And to remember, as we look at these choices, your choices are not determined by your words. Your choices are determined by your actions. Because we could say one thing all day long, but if we're doing the opposite, that's what we're choosing. Okay, so we're going to look at the choices. The first choice that we're going to look at is the two treasures. Okay, so number one, if you're writing, I got like actual points today. Two treasures, that's number one. Verses 19 through 21 talks about the different treasures. Treasures on earth, treasures on heaven. Earthly treasure, heavenly treasure, right? It's always going to be your choice. Now, I think what a lot of people, the part that we mess up on this is that we look at earthly treasure over here as this is a bad thing, and heavenly treasure is this is a good thing. And I don't think that's technically the case. Heavenly treasure is absolutely the good thing, but earthly treasure in and of itself is not bad. It just has no ultimate value, okay? So I think a lot of people look at these passages by Jesus, and it's like, okay, well, I have to give away every single thing that I have and be completely, in poverty to be righteous. Except all that does is point back to exactly what the Pharisees were trying to do in some way, if we do it that way, that we're just then trying to earn our own righteousness. So earthly treasure is not bad, but it doesn't have any ultimate value. And if you're storing up for earthly treasure, then that's bad, okay? What we do with the treasure that God gives us determines what we get and how we go forward. And so I want to look at another passage real quick. And you can turn there if you want. You don't have to. It's in Matthew chapter 25, and I'm going to read it real quick. In here I think it says the parable of the bags of gold, talents, depending on how you look at it. And it's Jesus talking. He says, "Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who received 5 bags of gold went at once to put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time the master of those servants returned and settled the accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. 'Master,' he said, 'you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more.' His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness.' The man with 2 bags of gold also came. 'Master,' he said, 'you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more.' His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness.' Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. 'Master,' he said, 'I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you had not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you.' His master replied, 'You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew I harvest where I had not sown and gathered where I have not gathered or scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will be given in abundance. And whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay. Here's the thing. One person got 5, one person got 2, one person got 1. We kind of have heard this story before. We know the premise of it. But here's what you have to know. They were all servants, okay? They all 3 were given the money by the master, right? And they were given money based on their abilities, meaning they were given money based on what they had already done or what they had already been doing with what had been given to them. They used what was given to them. 2 of them used the money to make more money. The last one did not. And the master came to settle the accounts. They all brought what was given to them before the master. They all brought what was given to them before the master. What was given and what was earned, they brought it all to the master because they knew all of it belonged to him. You see that? They knew all of it belonged to him. The first 2 didn't come and say, okay, here's the original amount you gave me. I'm going to keep what I made. Or here's what I made for you. I'm going to keep the original amount you gave to me because that's what you gave to me. Or here's, 10% of, here's my tithe off of, my net income after taxes because that's what I'm going to give. No, they brought it all to the master because they knew that it was his. And when we see things that way, when we understand that everything that we have is actually God's, then we will not store up for ourselves earthly treasures. We may have some things on this earth, but it will all be things ready to be used for his glory. They will all be things ready to be turned into heavenly treasures. Because everything that we use on this earth, everything that we do, sometimes we think, treasures in heaven is just doing the dirtiest job at the church. That's how you get treasures in heaven. That's not it. It's everything that God gives us and how we use it ends up giving us the treasures in heaven, okay? And that really what it is it's if we look at everything we do on this earth, whether it be what we do with our money or what we do with our stuff or what we do with our time or what we do with our skills and our talents and those things, if we look at everything on earth as an eternal investment, it's all God's, and all we're doing is giving it to him. All we're doing is laying it before him and asking him, what do you want me to do with this? That's why so often I talk about, we should tithe, and that's, give 10% back to the church. We should do that. But there's 90% you should still talk to God about because it's still his. He still gave all that to you too. So we should be bringing all of this before him, right? Because it's an eternal investment. If we serve someone, or if we sacrifice for someone, or if we give, when we see all that God has given us as part of our eternity, whether it be time, talent, treasures, then we're not spending ourselves trying to hang on to the stuff of this world. We're spending ourselves for him. And whatever he says, that's what we use it for. Because we know that everything we have here is not permanent, right? You guys know that, right? You never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul, right? Because they're not taking that with them. It's not our treasure. It's his treasure, right? It's what he gave us. It's not our treasure. You know what our treasure is? He's our treasure. He's our treasure. And it says right in there, where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. So do you want it on all this stuff that's going to pass away? Or on him? I read this quote. It says, it is not so much the disciples' wealth that Jesus is concerned with as the disciples' loyalty. Materialism is in direct conflict with loyalty to God. And not just having stuff, but that being the important thing. Right? Okay. So that's the difference between the 2 treasures. Number 2, we're going to talk about 2 visions. Not visions like dreams, like 2 ways of seeing things. Verse 22 and 23, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Okay, light, darkness. Again, it's going to be your choice. In here, it says healthy, unhealthy. Those translations have varied. And really, When you talk about the eyes and they say healthy, sometimes there's a translation that say if the eye is good or bad eyes, or good or evil eyes. But really, an accurate translation of it is generous or greedy eyes. How we see things. Do we see things generous, or do we see things as greedy? Again, good and evil would be another translation. And again, at first glance, it seems like this is completely off subject. Why is he talking about, healthy eyes and unhealthy eyes? But really, it all lines up because it's about whether our eyes are generous or whether our eyes are greedy. I read this today. It says an evil eye was a phrase in use. You guys ever heard the word evil eye? I'm going to give you the evil eye. Like, you glaring at somebody. Moms have that eye, right? Where they look at the kid, like from across the room to let them know, they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Okay, an evil eye was a phrase in use among the ancient Jews to denote an envious, covetous man or disposition, a man who repined at his neighbor's prosperity, loved his own money, and would do nothing in the way of charity for God's sake. That was what an evil eye was, and that's what we're looking at. So, we think of evil eye as glaring at people, but really what it initially meant was a greedy person. It's about having a greedy eye. So, do you have generous eyes or do you have greedy eyes? Let's look at it. Generous eyes brings light to our lives. Now listen, I know this is primarily talking about money and treasure and that kind of thing, and it definitely applies to that, but I think our eyes, and all of this really applies to much more than that, because it's not just about money. When we choose to look at others generously, it brings light into our lives, and it brings light through our lives, right? When we see others in a positive light, when we assume the best about people, when we give others the benefit of the doubt, when we look for things that are positive or encouraging about others, our eyes are generous or healthy or full of light. And that's just the way it is. But when we think of others in a negative way and we assume the worst about people and we don't give others the benefit of the doubt, when we think every single person is not being truthful, or we see things as negative or discouraging, or we're always looking at the worst case scenario, that's really the greedy eyes. That's our eyes being greedy or unhealthy or full of darkness. Like I said, when our eyes are generous, it brings even more light into our lives. When our eyes are greedy, it says our whole body will be full of darkness, right? And again, this is primarily talking about finances and our treasures and things like that. When we look at other people generously in that way, it brings light. And when we don't, it brings darkness. It's impossible to be people who walk in the light if our eyes are full of darkness. Do you guys know that? We cannot walk in the light the way Christ has for us to walk in the light if our eyes are full of darkness, if we're full of just looking at people like waiting for them to do something wrong the whole time. And I think the part in there that kind of strikes me that I'm always like trying to figure out, and this is not like I didn't do some research, and this is, like what smart people say. This is just something that I felt like kind of makes sense to me. When it talks about in there, but if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. And then it says, if then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And I never really could understand that, but I was thinking about it and praying about it. What it kind of means to me is that if we say we're Christians, right? If we say we're followers of Christ, if we say we're like Christ, yet our eyes are greedy, then the darkness is even greater than someone who has greedy eyes but doesn't say they're a Christian. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like if we proclaim to be the light, because that's what Jesus said, right? Jesus said he's the light of the world, and then he turns to us, his disciples, and says, you are the light of the world. So if we're saying we're his disciples, and we say we're the light, but then our eyes are constantly in a way that's greedy, I think that darkness is greater than someone who's just greedy and doesn't know Jesus. I think that's like the epitome of greater darkness. So, if we find that our eyes are a little greedy, how do we fix that? How do we fix having eyes that are not generous, that are not willing to give the benefit of the doubt. Give grace, give mercy, give forgiveness, give love, give the things, that we have, that we have been given. How do we change that? I believe that how you look at people is in direct proportion to how your eyes are fixed. And this is where it goes back to earthly and heavenly. Because if we're looking at people on this earth, you're right. I mean, really. If we look at the majority of the people on this earth, it's right to distrust, right? Because most people are really jacked up. It's right to be skeptical of what people say because a lot of people don't always tell the truth. We have a we have a society of this media influence, and you don't know what the truth is. I mean, literally, you don't know what the truth is. You base truth based on which news media you listen to the most, right? So if we're looking at things on this earth, absolutely, our eyes are going to get more and more and more greedy because that's what's going on in here. More and more envious. We're going to be thinking about what we can get, how we can get it, how we can get by, how we can get more or whatever else. But if we are not looking about earthly stuff, just like the treasure thing, if we're not looking for earthly treasures, but we're looking to him, heavenly, if our eyes are fixed on Jesus, we'll be much more likely to look at people with more grace and mercy and forgiveness and kindness and love because we'll have our eyes fixed on him, right? Empathy. If our eyes are fixed on something else, we're going to have skepticism and distrust and negativity and hatred. That's what we're going to get because that's what's all around us. So when it comes to the two visions, you really need to examine how you look at others to determine what your vision's like, okay? And then, I think, okay, I can think of arguments on this. What if they're not trustworthy? What if they're horrible people? What if they're lying? What if they're, did a bad thing, going to do a bad thing, whatever? And then I think, how did Jesus look at Judas? You know what I mean? So what we look at is super important. How we look at others is determined by what we look at. And I think that we're going to be filled with how we see. If we have generous eyes, we're going to be filled with light. If we have greedy eyes, we're going to be filled with darkness. I want you to listen to this. Often a materialistic, miserly, selfish, condemning Christian justifies their sin by saying it's just one area of my life. But even as the darkness of the eye affects everything in the body, so a wrong attitude towards material things or other people brings darkness to our whole being. This two vision thing we have to get because it's not good when we live in a way where our eyes are unhealthy or greedy or bad or whatever word you want to use in there. All right, number 3, you can write down 2 masters. So we got 2 treasures, 2 visions, now we're going to talk about 2 masters. Verse 24, no one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, this isn't about having more than one job, because at first I was like I'd read this before and thought, oh, I need to really commit, especially when I was living in California, because I had a job, and my job wanted me to kind of, go to training and learn more and gain more knowledge and move on in this field that I was in. But at the same time, the church asked me to be a lay pastor. You guys know what a lay pastor is? A pastor doesn't get paid. Okay? So it was like this was what God had called me to, but this was, what was paying the bills. And so I was kind of like, I can't have 2 masters. I got to pick one, and it didn't really work out very well because this isn't about having more than one thing like that you do. That's not what this is about. This is specifically, Jesus is setting an example in a society where there were slaves, and there was slave-master relationships, okay? And a slave knew that they were owned by the master. They weren't owned by more than one master. It wasn't like masters went in together on a slave, like, hey, let's split them 50-50. That's not what happened. A master owned a slave. That's the way they did it. And the master told them what to do, and they did it. And Jesus is making the point here to a group of people who absolutely understand this premise, that they are Basically what he's stating to these people is just like a simple impossibility, and they totally understand it. I think we lose that sometimes because we don't have the same kind of background as that. But he's saying, look, here's the deal. You're only going to serve one master, and if you think you can do both, you're deceiving yourself because it cannot be done. You cannot serve two masters. Jesus is making it really clear, and that's why I believe that God makes it clear here. And that's also why I believe that God makes it super clear when he says, you can have no other gods before me, right? Because what he's saying is there can't be anything else that divides your loyalty. You can't serve two things at once. It doesn't work like that. You cannot serve both. So the two masters he sets up here just happen to be God, him, and money. Again, going back to treasures in heaven, going back to generous or greedy, the way we look at things. So those are their choices, God or money. Those are the masters. Which one do we want to serve? Now, I think we're all in church here, so we'd all say we want to serve God, obviously. Duh, Pastor Dale, come on. But that's not always the way our lives are lived out. One way money is sometimes translated is mammon, okay? Mammon, if you've heard that before. And mammon is actually almost kind of a better translation here because it's not just about cash, okay? But material things that we either currently possess or material things that we want, that we don't currently possess. That's what mammon entails, okay? So all of that, money, stuff we have, stuff we want, is either going to be what we serve or we're going to serve God. It's either going to be what we serve or we're going to serve God. It's either going to be an idol or we're going to serve God. But I think we got to take it even a step further because all of this really still rides on the first verse in Matthew chapter 6 where it says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. It goes along with this as well, with this treasures in heaven, because people will make it look like they're doing one thing so that other people will think that they're righteous, even in this area. And we have to remember that because this verse, again, points to our motives, not just our actions. It points to our heart. Jesus is still bringing heart issues out in here in chapter 6. He's still saying, you got to look at what you're serving in here, not just what you look like you're serving out here. Because I could look like I'm serving God wholeheartedly out here, but in here I could still be finagling, right? I could still be trying to, double up on my master servant if I really wanted to. See, Jesus is not just talking about our money, but he's talking about our heart. So we always have to remember that, because if we just make changes based on our actions, we're still missing out something in here. So the big question, how can you tell if you're serving God or you're serving mammon? How can we tell? Is God my God, or is money and things my God? Here's how you can tell. You will always sacrifice for your God. You will sacrifice for the God that you serve. You will give things up for your God. You will give yourself wholeheartedly to your God. You will spend your very self on your God. So now you guys just have to determine, where does that line up in my life? Do I do that for God, or do I do that for stuff? I know this is a super light topic today, so I'm glad you guys are all very engaged. And also, just on a side note, for some of those out there that are like, well, I don't have any money, so I don't have to really deal with this, or I'm poor or whatever. If you don't have a lot of money or any money, you can still choose to serve it. You still serve mammon, all right? This quote I read, the poor can be just as greedy and covetous as the rich can be. It doesn't matter how much we have. It doesn't matter if it's $1 or $1 million. We can still serve it rather than God. So at the end of the day, two masters and you can only serve one, right? You cannot serve both at the same time. And you will sacrifice to the one that you serve. you will make sacrifices to the God that you serve. That's how you know what you're serving, okay? So tonight it's all been about these choices. 2 treasures, 2 visions, 2 masters. Here's what you need to do, and here's what you need to take away from tonight. You got to take an honest assessment of where you're at, because I don't know your heart. Nobody knows your heart. God knows your heart. That's it. Sometimes you don't even know your heart. So take an honest assessment and be like, okay, these things that we've talked about tonight, where is my treasure laid up? What are my eyes doing on a regular basis? What kind of vision do I have? And who is my master based on what I sacrifice to? And then if you're coming to a realization like, oh man, I am messed up in this, man, you can change, right? And if you're like, oh man, I'm dialed in on this, I got it all down pat, I think you should pray some more. No, I'm saying, no, that's not exactly what I'm saying. I'm just saying, just make sure you know what's up, because it's not like if you have 2 out of 3 good, you're good, right? Of these 3 categories we've talked about. It's not like, okay, well, pretty good on treasure and masters, my vision's not great, but it's all right. No, it's all of these kind of need to be, the choices should be in line with all 3. Because if the choice isn't in line with one of them, the choice probably isn't in line really with the other 2 either. So let's be those who take honest evaluation of who we're serving based on where our heart is. And then make changes that are necessary moving forward. I can't do that for you. That's up to you. So let's do that, all right? Let's pray. God, you're good to us. Thanks for tonight. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your grace, Lord, and that times where we get all spun out and start focusing on things we shouldn't, you always call us back to yourself. I thank you that you never give up on us. I thank you that you continually offer us forgiveness, even when we make the same mistakes over and over. And God, tonight I pray for each one of us, Lord, that we would just take an honest assessment of our heart in this scenario that we've talked about today, and really examine what it is, where our treasure is, and what our vision is like, and who or what we have been serving. And God, if there's anything that needs changed, even if we're just straying a little bit, Lord, I pray that you would point that out to us, lay that at our feet, bring it before us. God, so we can repent and get back on course, just running after you. And if we come out of this and we feel like we've got things in line, God, I pray that you would continue to draw us closer to yourself and continue to keep us walking toward you. If that's the direction that we're currently walking, Lord, I pray that we would stay on that path, and it would never be something that causes pride to rise up in us or anything like that, but we would just humbly walk before you, knowing that you are good and everything that you do is good. Lord, we love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, have an amazing night. Next week we're talking about worry, so don't stress this week, okay?